Good morning. The title of today's lecture is The Dawn of English Literature, Part 2. The first subtitle is Literature of the Germanic Tribes. The Germanic tribes had literature, but it wasn't written down. Yes, the stories and poems they made up were repeated and remembered. The Germanic tribes were fond of poetry. Their poems didn't remain unchanged. Poets improved them in form, and sometimes they changed them to make them more interesting. At that time there were professional poets too, who went from one place to another or had positions at the courts of kings. They sang songs in which they enlarged and magnified the deeds and events which the songs were describing. Yes, it's my cat. Yes, they even sometimes added supernatural qualities to a hero. She likes to sing. Most of those early poems were based on historic facts, but historic elements were obscured by poetic and mythical additions. In the 7th century, the Anglo-Saxons became Christians and began composing religious works. After Christianity was officially adopted by the ruling classes, monastic schools were established where Latin was taught. The most learned people of that time were monks. Some of them began to put in writing poems and songs that reached them. Such people were called scribes. Scribe comes from the Latin word scribere, to write. The written Anglo-Saxon language developed on the basis of the Latin alphabet. Part 2. Beowulf. Beowulf is the most important poem of the Anglo-Saxon period. Though the Angles brought Beowulf with them to England, it has nothing to do with it. The epic is not even about the Anglo-Saxons, but about the Scandinavians, when they lived on the continent in the 3rd or 4th century AD. The story of Beowulf was written down in the 10th century by an unknown author, and the manuscript is now kept in the British Museum in London. Its social interest lies in the vivid description of the life of that period, of the manners and customs of the people at that time, of the relations among the members of the society, and in the portrayal of their towns, ships, and feasts. The scene takes place among the Jutes. The poem describes the warriors in battle and at peace during their feasts and amusements. The main hero, Beowulf, is a strong, courageous, unselfish, proud, and honest man. He defends his people against the unfriendly forces of nature and becomes the most beloved and kindest king on the earth, as the theme of the poem is the struggle of good against evil. Beowulf fights not for his glory, he fights for the benefit of his people. Although Beowulf was a Jute and his home was Jutland, we say that the Song of Beowulf is an English poem. The social conditions it depicted are English. Both the form and the spirit of the poem are English. The poem is a true piece of English literature. The poem is composed with great skill. The author used many vivid words and descriptive phrases. It's not only the subject of the poem that interests us, but also its style. Beowulf is one of the early masterpieces of the Anglo-Saxon or Old English language. The poem is famous for its metaphors. For instance, the poet calls the sea the swan's road, the body the bone house, a warrior a hero in battle, etc. Part 3. The story. The epic consists of 2 parts. The first part tells us how Beowulf freed the Danes from 2 monsters. Hrothgar, king of the Danes, in his old age, had built near the sea a hole called Herod. My cat is coughing. He and his men gathered there for feast. Yes, she's coughing. One night, as they were all sleeping, a frightful monster called Grendel broke into the hole, killed 30 of the sleeping warriors, and carried off their bodies to devour them in his lair under the sea. The horrible half-man creature came night after night. Fear and death reigned in the great hall. For 12 winters Grendel's horrible raids continued. At last the rumor of Grendel and his horrible deeds crossed over the sea and reached Beowulf, who was a man of immense strength and courage. Yes, now she wants to come into the room, to enter the room. When he heard the story, Beowulf decided to fight the monster and free the Danes. With 14 companions, he crossed the sea. This is how his voyage is described in the poem. The foamy-necked floater, fanned by the breeze, likest a bird glided the waters. Till 24 hours hereafter, the twist-stamped vessel had travelled such distance that the sailing men saw the sloping embankments, the sea cliffs gleaming, precipitous mountains. The Danes receive Beowulf and his companions with great hospitality. They make a feast in Herod, at which the Queen passes the mead cup to the warriors with her own hand. But as night approaches, the fear of Grendel is again upon the Danes. They all withdraw after the king has warned Beowulf of the frightful danger of sleeping in the hall. Beowulf stays in the hall with his warriors, saying proudly that since weapons cannot harm the monster, he will wrestle him barehanded. Here is the description of Grendel's approach to Herod. Forth from the fens, from the misty moonlands, Grendel came gliding, God's wrath bebore, came under clouds until he saw clearly, glittering with gold plates, the mead hall of man. Down fell the door, though fastened with firebands. Open it sprang at the stroke of his paw. Swollen with rage burst in the bale-bringer. Flamed in his eyes a fierce light likest fire. Breaking into the hall, Grendel seizes one of the sleepers and devours him. Then he approaches Beowulf and stretches out a claw, only to find it clutched in a grip of steel. A sudden terror strikes the monster's heart. He rose, struggles, tries to free his arm, but Beowulf leaps to his feet and grapples his enemy barehanded. After a desperate struggle, Beowulf manages to tear off the monster's arm. Grendel escapes shrieking across the moor and plunges into the sea to die. Beowulf hands the huge arm with its terrible claws over the king's seat. The Danes rejoice in Beowulf's victory. When night falls, a great feast is spread in Herod. Beowulf receives such presents, everybody is happy. The Danes once more go to sleep in the great hall. At midnight, another monster comes, mother of Grendel, who wants to avenge her son. She seizes the king's best friend and counselor and rushes away with him over the fence. The old king is broken-hearted, but Beowulf tries to console him. Sorrow not, wise man. It's better for each that his friend he avenge than that he mourn much. Each of us shall the end await of worldly life. Let he who may gain honor ere death. Then Beowulf prepares for a new fight. He plunges into the horrible place while his companions wait for him on the shore. After a terrible fight at the bottom of the sea, in the cave where the monsters live, Beowulf kills the she-monster with a magic sword which he finds in the cave. The hero returns to Herod, where the Danes are already mourning for him, thinking him dead. Triumphantly, Beowulf returns to his native land. In the last of the poem there is another great fight. Beowulf is now an old man. He has reigned for 50 years, beloved by all his people. He has overcome every enemy but one, a fire dragon keeping watch over an enormous treasure hidden among the mountains. Again Beowulf goes to fight for his people, but he is old and his end is near. In a fierce battle, the dragon is killed, but the fire has entered Beowulf's lungs. He sends Wiglaf, the only of his warriors who had the courage to stand by him in his last fight, to the dragon's cave for the treasures. Beowulf dies, leaving the treasures to the people. So that was the lecture, and the task for today is only to write it down, to make a picture of your writing, and send it to our group ВКонтакте. See you. Bye-bye.